Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the Two Film Introverts podcast, episode 15. I'm Rowe, aka Idiosyncratic on Twitter, and
I'm Paul, and I am at A Paul Bullock on Twitter.
remember to follow us on Twitter at the number 2, then Film Introverts as well. That's really handy to know if anyone ever comes across this on YouTube and thinks, oh, I want to know more about what they're on about, and then follow us on Twitter if you so wish. There we go. That awkwardness is over. How are we doing, Paul? It's past Christmas. It's past New Year. We're in 2018.
It
Ooh.
is, yes. Exciting times. Very little has changed. I am basically the same person as I was last year. New Year's has had no effect on me whatsoever. So, how about you?
Oh, I'm okay. I've found myself buying a load of DVDs lately. It's been
Oh, good
very,
work.
very hard to keep myself from buying even more.
Mhm. Yeah, I know the feeling.
So, how was your New Year's? How did you spend it?
I spent it in bed with a cold, but I got some reading done, which has been nice. I got the His Dark Materials books for Christmas, so I've just been reading through those, which has been fun. So yeah, but yeah, it was just an ill Christmas and New Year. So fun times.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I spent my New Year with my boyfriend. Usually we go away to Europa Park for New Year's, but we decided to sit out this year, mostly because I am poor, probably because I've been buying DVDs, and we just watched Sherlock Holmes and then went to bed early. That's how exciting our life was. And when Mum asked me what we were doing, and I said, "Oh, just that," and she was like, "Oh, you're so boring." And it's like, "Yeah, that's how I want to be." Not a party
Wow.
goer.
Yeah, I don't think, you know what? I honestly don't think I've ever been to a New Year's party. I just can't be bothered with them.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, fair
not
enough.
my thing at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're not going to go into the news because there actually hasn't been any news worth talking about, in our opinions. So we're
Yeah.
just going to dive straight into what we've been watching. Now, I
Mm,
want to go first because
go
I
on.
have finally seen Star Wars The Last Jedi, and
Yes.
I didn't like it. I loved it.
Ah.
I know I
Very
pulled that
good.
same trick on Twitter, yeah,
Yeah.
but I enjoyed it so much, and I can get where the criticism comes from, but at the same time, I was just having a lot of fun watching it. As I genuinely teared up, I cried, I got angry, all the usual things that come with emotions, and I loved it so much. I'd love to go see it again. Actually, I don't know if I'll have the time, but maybe.
Yeah. I'm in complete agreement. And spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, if there is indeed anyone out there who still hasn't seen it. But what did you think of what they did with Luke's character? Because that seems to be what most people are annoyed at, that Luke was doubting himself and he wasn't the perfect hero that he had been in the original three films. So what did you think of that?
I think it's a legit character
Hmm.
development thing that could happen to Luke. I
Yeah.
mean, come on, he's one of the last in the generation of Jedi, along with, well, Rey doesn't really count as a Jedi, really, yet. But you can see
Yeah.
how he would doubt himself. I mean, come on, he almost killed his own nephew because he thought he was going to go to the dark side, but then he ended up making him go to the dark side. And the fact that Luke had that moment where in which he actually did go to the dark side, it didn't really help matters. So it was all for naught, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't. The weird thing that I found with this film is not what's annoyed me isn't that people have disliked it and been vehement in their dislike. It's that there's been so little actual logical discussion that it's all been, I hate this film, it's disgraceful, it destroys Star Wars. And it's really frustrating to see that, because as somebody who kind of wants to hear what people have found so repulsive about it, I've gone through all the reviews, I've gone through the messages on Twitter, and it's just like, well, I'm not really understanding why people hate it this much. It's just pure anger you're getting on Twitter, and it's a real shame, because I think there are flaws in it. I think there's things wrong with it, but it worked as a whole, and I'd kind of like to hear more nuanced discussion as to why people weren't so keen, more sensible discussion. But I suppose I'm asking too much from Star Wars fans, sadly.
I think that there may be some people out there who want to give like genuine constructive criticism and not just like,
Mm.
oh, this is what should have been done, and this is how this character should have acted, and this shouldn't have happened at all. Overall, the film is literally about failure
Yeah,
and the need to accept that failure happens, and you've got to accept it and move on. And especially when it comes to the resistance in particular, it shows that you can't work with division between everyone. Really, it's like you're all in the same situation, and you need to learn to work together. You've got to trust each other, and it doesn't help that there's quite a bit of well, so I wouldn't really say it myself necessarily, but I've seen it be bandied around like toxic masculinity, with the fact that Poe decides to disobey orders given by Leia and pretty much destroys part of the resistance himself without having a thought as to it. He just saw the opportunity to get to the First Order, and he did it, but it was at a cost, really. That it's understandable, but it's not very heroic of him. And the same goes for what happens with Finn and Rose when they go off to the casino planet. Yeah, it's understandable that they want to go through with it, but they shouldn't have. And the fact that they didn't put any trust in Holdo as well, or just listen to her. It's quite a big thing, really, with that film.
mm.
I feel like I'm doing a bad job of explaining, but
It's
it's just the fact that you need to listen to people. It's
yes, totally.
literally that, and sometimes you got to put your trust in people above you as well. And oh,
Yeah, and it totally undermines the hero myth, the idea that there are these perfect preordained heroes, whether it's Luke Skywalker, whether it's Poe thinking that he can be the dashing, heroic pilot, whether it's Finn thinking that he can base his entire life around basically trying to save Rey when she doesn't really need saving. It's about these characters who, or whether it's Rey thinking that Luke is going to be the hero who's going to bring down the First Order. It's all about these characters who are absolutely obsessed with the idea that there are people out there who are perfect and flawless, and they can swoop in and save the day, whether it's themselves or whether it's someone else. And the film completely brings that whole idea to the ground. And I think for the eighth film in a Star Wars in a major franchise, 9 if you count Rogue One, I suppose, that's really bold for a film of that kind. That's a bold message for a film of that kind to take on.
absolutely, and I love it because we need
Mm.
more of these deconstructions when it comes to these sorts of things. Like in, for example, Clone Wars and Rebels, people see these as being, very kid friendly, and they're not going to have that much of an impact. They're just there. Disney is sort of, well, especially with Rebels, they thought that Disney was going to sanitize Star Wars. But what's happened is that every single season has gotten darker and edgier. And, well, not like in a, oh, we're going to make this stuff happen because, it'd be cool and stuff. It's literally just like, no, these are the legitimate consequences of this action. And this is going to lead into this major incident, which is going to cause more pain to the rebellion, so on and so forth. Like the high stakes are absolutely terrifying. There is legitimate torture happening in Rebels as well, deaths, so on and so forth, and it's a lot of people underestimate, just like the futility and the genuine fear that happens within that universe. Because as you said before, it's like there's this belief that there are just these heroics that go on, and that these characters are meant to be flawless or not have any fears or qualms. Like they just get on with the job, and then they're praised, they're celebrated. But it's way more than that, because like people in real life, characters are complex, and there are all sorts of things going on that lead to these nuanced and complicated situations. And it doesn't just happen within the series itself, like with the trilogy or with the trilogy of films. It's just a natural thing that happens, and it, as well as failure, it's people are nuanced and complex and complicated, and that's something that we need to see more of in Star Wars, really. Because to be honest, it does get very, very tiring to hear about how cool this thing is and how great that is, and why Luke is the best character, so on and so forth. Much like, hearing me talking gets very tiring. And we just need to see more of that deconstruction as well. And, it does hit quite hard to home, I guess, for some, like, especially with what's happening in America and here in Britain with the government. And it seems like that there is like resistance and rebellion rising up, but it's quite futile at this point. And maybe I'm just rambling on, but it can sort of be reflected in real world society,
Yeah, no, but I think you're totally right, and without wanting to labour the point, I think it's something that's been going on in major films for a little while now. You had the recent Superman films have sort of tried to deconstruct Superman to a degree. We can discuss ad infinitum about how much they've succeeded, but they've certainly tried to take that angle. And even a lot of the recent Disney animated films, you've had characters like Hans or Callahan in Big Hero 6, characters who we are supposed to believe in and trust and see as, perfect, nice characters, and they end up being the bad guys. So it's quite an interesting trend in film as a whole that I think Star Wars has really successfully brought into the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. But overall, I like The Last Jedi. I'd like a family of porgs, please.
I was going to ask about porgs. Yes, so you like the porgs as well.
Oh, they were so great. Just whenever I saw them on screen, I was like, yes, yes, just yes. And I was with my mum when I was watching it, and she just kept looking at me. It's like, why are you acting that way? She also couldn't quite see the porgs because she forgot her glasses.
Oh.
But I did love it.
Yeah, I loved something that I saw on Twitter last night, which was both beautiful and horrifying. It was a corgi with a porg's head, and it was called a porgy.
Yes.
So that was quite terrifying, really.
I saw that.
It was so good. But what I really loved about what they did with the porgs is they turned them into they sort of they were there for atmosphere. Like there wasn't a shot of Actu or Acto or however it's pronounced. There wasn't a shot of that island where there wasn't a porg flying around or making a noise or in shot somewhere. And I thought that was really well done because it just gave the whole place a sense of atmosphere and it made it feel real. So I quite liked how they did that.
I just liked how they replaced real world puffins on that island. They are literally space puffins.
Yeah, absolutely. Chewbacca's a space dog and the porgs are space puffins. It's great.
I hope that the porg gets a surname. No, gets like a proper name by Chewie or something. Like Han Porgo or Porg Solo. Just please humour me and give him a little Han Solo outfit as well. It'd make my day.
Oh god, that would be amazing.
It would be.
So, have you been watching anything else apart from Star Wars?
Lots and lots of classic films, I must
Very good.
admit. Uh, yeah, I've been on a bit of a binge lately, I must admit. I mean, I'm having to tone myself down a bit because I can't decide what I want to watch nowadays. I could have watched a Norwegian resistance World War II film earlier, but no, instead I just thought, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, why not? And you know,
There you go.
I was watching it like right before we started before we started recording this podcast, and I forgive it. It's a good film.
Yes. There we
I
go.
haven't watched it in several years, but
I
I was
I'm not the only one who likes it. Yes.
yeah. I need to finish watching it. It was I finished. I stopped watching it at the moment where Mutt was about to swing with the monkeys,
Oh
which is
yes.
probably the best bit to just stop it on for the time being.
Yeah, best leave it there while your memories of it and your experiences of it is still good.
Yeah, I guess it's because I'm older now. I can appreciate it more. That tends to be the case with
Yes.
films, isn't it? Like you watch it when you're young and you don't quite understand what's going on whatsoever, and you go back to it as an adult and you think, oh, that's a pretty good joke. Oh, that's
Mm.
actually quite a fun plot. All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it's 10 years old this year, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Where has the
Whoa.
time gone?
Wow.
So,
So, what have you
um,
been watching?
what have I been watching? Well, you know what? I have not been watching many films at all. Instead, I have been watching Friends on Netflix because they put it on Netflix in the UK on New Year's Day. And I thought, you know what? I'll watch a few episodes just for nostalgia. And I've just decided to keep going with it because I'm about I've watched about 21 episodes of it, and it's really weird. That's I can't think of any other way to put it. It's just weird. Why does Ross have a monkey? Why is that happening? What's going on with any of this? It's the
How
best
can
word for it.
Monica and Rachel afford that apartment?
Precisely. Well, how did Rachel move in at all? Because the first episode, it's made very clear that while Monica and Rachel knew each other as kids and teenagers, they don't seem to have kept up with each other after school to the point that Monica wasn't invited to Rachel's wedding. And then suddenly Rachel's just living with her. It's like, has she just invited herself round and she never left? It's very strange. And Rachel doesn't have a job for quite a few episodes until she's living on a terrible wage as a waitress. And again, like you say, how can she possibly afford that apartment? It's weird. It's very odd. And I think I've probably been spoiled by watching too many Frasier episodes because you go back to those first episodes of Frasier, and that first season has some classic episodes and classic moments in it, and they really hit the ground running. Here, all the actors seem a little awkward. They're all pausing for, when they tell a joke, when there's a gag, they pause just a little bit so that the audience can laugh, and it's really strange at times. And again, why does Ross have a monkey? Who thought that that was a good idea? There's so many odd little things in there, weird uses of music, Phoebe being a bit too kooky. Ross you just want to punch Ross half the time. It's very strange. Very strange. It's definitely, I think, for a show that became as big as it did, it's got a very awkward first season.
Yes, I will definitely agree. I pretty much grew up on Friends because my sister used to watch it when it was on TV, and as a result, I would end up watching it. And we have some of the videos upstairs from some of the seasons and a couple of the DVDs, and I've sat through the every season as well. That was quite something. I just managed to blitz through them, and I can't remember half of what happens, which is probably a good idea. But yeah, I get what you mean about Friends just being weird. I guess it is that kind of show, really, and I don't understand some of it half the time. But at the same time, it's just a show, you know.
It's yeah, because it was something that I watched a heck of a lot as a teenager, and yeah, it's weird looking back on it now as a 33-year-old.
It is still entertaining, I
Yeah,
would admit.
totally.
I mean, everyone pretty much agrees that one of the best episodes is the one where they play the quiz game to win Monica's apartment.
Mm.
And,
Yeah,
and to be honest,
that's
that is
fantastic.
that is that is a very funny episode. Excusing like what happens with Phoebe's mum and stuff, which is never returned to in later seasons, which well, that bothers me a lot. Had a big a big Phoebe plot happening about her lineage, so on and so forth, and who her real mum is, and then they never return to it whatsoever.
Yeah,
Even though her mum is actually still alive and she could pop in at any time, but nah. And
yeah,
also
there
just
are.
and also just like also the history doesn't make sense a lot of the time. So
Yeah, there are some very, very strange little things like that. But I think it's one of those shows that really became as big as it did just because it hit the zeitgeist in the right at the right time and in the right way. It is the most 90s program you could possibly hope to watch. If aliens ever descend on this planet and want to learn about that crazy decade known as the 90s, they should just watch Friends, and that'll pretty much bring them up to speed because it really is very, very 1990s.
yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to broadly cover classic films between 1920 and 1969. Now, we plan to cover specific aspects of that period of film in the near future. So, specific directors, actors, genres, maybe composers, so on and so forth. And it's something that we want to try out, and we know that we need to actually listen to the You Must Remember This podcast, which is it's a very popular one that even you, our listeners, may have heard of and probably listened to as well. Um, yeah, we just felt in the mood to discuss classic films because it's an important part of film culture, really, and popular culture as well. We're not just going to limit ourselves to Hollywood. We're going to talk about some British films as well, but not much else in terms of European or Eastern classic films because we don't really know any of that stuff, do we, Paul?
No, not
No.
hugely.
Yeah, like we know about the French New Wave and all that,
Mm.
but we don't really have that much else to say.
Yeah, we can't really speak on it with any real authority.
I don't think we could speak much about classic films with much authority either, but we're gonna try.
We're gonna give it a go anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we start generally just by talking about why we like this sort of era of classic film, why we're choosing to discuss them?
Okay, you go first.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I sort of I've always been a fan of history. As a kid, I loved history. It was one of my favorite subjects at school, and as I started getting more into film and consuming film as more than just an entertainment, it was sort of a nice way to marry my interest in film with my interest in history by going back to older films and sort of seeing how they were put together. You know, the way that a film was put together in the 30s, for example, the way that Frank Capra would make a film is very different to the way that Steven Spielberg would make a film these days, or in the 80s or the 90s, because cinema has sort of moved on. And I think it's really interesting to look back at those filmmakers, look back at those films and sort of see how they were made, the contexts, the sort of social and political and economic contexts that they were made in, and sort of learn from them, because we don't really talk about classic film enough. This is going to sound like me standing on a soapbox, but you know, one of the big problems with, say, Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and things like that, and all these great streaming services, which are great for getting out modern stuff and making it very easy to view modern stuff, and maybe some sort of more niche indie sort of filmmaking, they're not great for classic films. You know, last year there were quite a few film websites talking about this, how there's just not much on Netflix in particular from before, say, 1960, 1970, that sort of era. It's all very modern. And I think it's becoming more and more important to look back on the years before 1970, which we sort of call the modern age, even though it's, 5 decades ago now. But we sort of define that as a modern age. And we don't really think in terms of what happened before that, and that's cutting off not only so many great filmmakers, you know, people like Frank Capra, people like you know, John Ford, you know, Orson Welles, people like that, but it's also reducing our understanding of great filmmakers of today. You know, we think of Star Wars. We've spoken of Star Wars. George Lucas was massively inspired by John Ford. Spielberg is massively inspired by John Ford. You know, there are filmmakers out there who have taken lessons from these classic filmmakers and built upon them. And if we don't study classic film, if we don't discuss classic film, if we don't watch classic film, then we sort of lose track of what film today is. And apart from all that pretentious garbage, it's just really fun to watch these films. There are some great, entertaining, colourful, ridiculous, sweeping, epic, wonderful films out there that I think as we go on in the next few episodes and into the future, and in this episode, I think we'll be covering in more depth. So there's my little soapbox lecture there, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed it.
Wow, that was quite something. Well, with me, obviously, when it comes to classic films, when you're growing up, you don't really watch them. You hear about certain things, and you get to know certain quotes as well. You see the imagery. You hear about the massive context. Well, no, not really the context, but you just hear a lot about how important they are and how amazing these films were. And as a kid, you don't really quite get that. And especially when it comes to classic films, I would say, especially for me, I didn't understand what was going on half the time. I wasn't connected with it as such. So it's like you hear about Citizen Kane or Casablanca, Lawrence of Arabia, which kind of comes under the umbrella, as well as King Kong and Dr. Zhivago. You hear about all of those, but you don't really understand what's so important about them. And I think it was when I was learning film in A level, that was when I kind of got a grip on classic films, because I was doing modules about westerns in which I watched Red River, and I thought it was really, really boring. And I also saw Vertigo as well. I got educated on that for a Hitchcock module, and everyone in my class, they didn't understand it whatsoever, and that kind of goes with what happened with Vertigo at the time, which it wasn't really understood, and it's only just coming into like a foray as Hitchcock's best film. But at the time, I didn't quite understand it either. until I actually did the research for the modules. It's like, wow, there's so much stuff here. And then I watched through most of the Hitchcock collection that my film studies teacher had, and I was amazed at this filmmaking, really, and just how interesting these plots could be. I mean, I wasn't terribly connected with some of them, I must admit, but it's things like, Vertigo, Rear Window, that really fascinated me, as well as the birds as well. That's an important one, and Psycho. That's another important one. See, it kind of goes on, and then it wasn't until I went to college about 2 years later to study film on the BTEC and then the H&D that I got more invested in classic films. And in fact, that was when I was introduced to Powell and Pressburger as well. My film teacher told me to watch The Red Shoes as well as The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. And from there, I was just like hooked. And I just slowly watched more and more as well. I think I did have to watch a couple of other classic films at that point in time for various modules. But overall, I was just amazed, really, at how much there was and what I'd been missing out on. And the important thing with classic films is like, yes, they are, quoted and you see the imagery around a lot, but I think it's more like what they stood for at the time that's really interesting to me, and the context they were made. Especially when it comes to the films in the 40s as well, because you've got the connection with what was happening during World War II in America and in Britain and in parts of Europe and Asia as well. There's so many films from that period that you can tell have the influence, like especially film noir, which is a very important genre because it deals with that worry of espionage and ambiguity regarding people, and just the general fear as well that was happening at the time. It kind of goes into thrillers as well, and into romance as well, where romance is that's quite a big deal at the time, wherein the heroes don't often get the girl, and sometimes the girl is a double agent of some kind. It kind of goes on, really. So overall, it's just like looking at classic films is important in terms of historical context, as you said. It's intrinsically tied into history, and the fact that a lot of directors and actors at that time were tied in with what was happening with the government as well. Like, for example, Cary Grant, when he had finished Arsenic and Old Lace, he didn't like his performance in that whatsoever, and so he instead, and there's some controversy on whether this is true or not, or where the money actually went, but he actually gave his salary to it wasn't like a form of military in the US. I think it was for soldiers or an army corps. I'm not quite sure, but either way, just the fact that lots of filmmakers and actors actually put themselves on the line to create all sorts of work to help with the war effort. That's also quite interesting. Like, whether or not you agree with what was happening at the time, which I know sounds quite stupid to say, but whether or not you agreed with, the war or with keeping peace, so on and so forth, I just find that all very interesting, really. I feel like I'm rambling, of course.
No.
But it's just very important to take a look at these films, not just as, oh, they were popular because they had this actor and that thing going on and iconic details, but because they showed like what life was potentially like. They're sort of view-ins, really.
No, but I think that's absolutely right. It's interesting that we've both sort of touched on the context that these films were made in, because the problem with the way that we watch these films now is, and it's sort of something we mentioned in our previous episode, the one before Christmas, is how classic films are almost used as schedule fillers on TV. So I mentioned in the last episode about, the likes of Gone with the Wind, Singing in the Rain, how they are always used, Ben-Hur as well, they're always used by TV stations over Christmas to fill up their schedules. And we were proven right.
Funny enough, Gone with the Wind was on Christmas Eve,
Yeah.
and
So,
Singing in the Rain, like I thought, was on Christmas Day.
yeah.
Not just once, but twice.
Twice, really?
It was on Channel 5, and then it was on TCM, like right
Wow.
after. I'm really not joking.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. I mean, TCM can sort of get away with it because if they don't put classic movies on, they've got no programming, and I suppose Singing in the Rain works quite well on Christmas. But yeah, it's just amazing that it was two different channels on the same day. But I mean, it sums it up. I mean, Gone with the Wind, I think I tweeted out that it started at 9:15 in the morning, and it didn't end until about 1:15 or 1:30 in the afternoon when you take in, I think Channel 5 has news breaks, certainly has advert breaks. So that's a big chunk of their schedule. That's the entire morning, Christmas Eve, filled up.
Yeah,
And
I actually watched some of it because I was at my boyfriend's, and he had like a load of things to do in the morning before we left, and so I was just downstairs watching it, and there were some bits which were really melodramatic and stuff, and I was like really into it because I love Gone with the Wind, and I've also read the book as well. It's really good. Um, so I was just like there, just like, I love this film. And Dave's family just said to me, "It's a bit melodramatic, isn't it?" I was like, "Yeah." Ooh, Scarlett O'Hara's a dirty piece of work, isn't she? I was like, "Yeah," but she's got her merits. She gets her comeuppance. But yeah, as you were saying,
yeah, I mean, I love Gone with the Wind as well, and I think the thing is that because these films are on TV at these sort of dead times, I suppose. People aren't. It's not prime time. People aren't generally watching, or at least sitting down to watch the whole thing. They're removed from their context, and people find them quite boring because they don't understand the context that they were made in. They're dipping in and out of them. Um, there's no atmosphere because it's not, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's not 9 o'clock at night. You've got the lights on. People are walking through your living room while you're watching it or whatever. The whole idea of watching a film and taking it all in is to an extent sort of removed. So these films lose their power, and because they're repeated so often, that just contributes to it. Bringing us more up to date. I watched E.T. when that was on ITV over Christmas. I think it was Boxing Day, and that's starting to lose its power as well because it's just repeated so often, over and over and over and over again on TV. And I think with old films, whether they're from the 80s, whether they're even older than that, the more that they're broadcast on TV, the more that they are removed from their context and they start to feel less special and less significant and less important than they actually are. And it's why I think it is important to look back on these classic films like Gone with the Wind, like Singing in the Rain, and sort of discuss them in a way that's as close as we can get to how it would have been when they were first released, looking specifically at them, at their context, at the actors involved, the writers, the directors, and understanding them from that point of view.
yeah, but we need to understand that not every person who watches a film is going to be interested in that notion, because to them
Yeah.
it's just a film, and
Yeah.
that's okay. I guess it's just like I guess with us, we just prefer to know the context a bit more. We're those types of film enthusiasts.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Film enthusiasts.
And don't get me wrong, there are loads of classic films out there that I watch just as, they're just purely entertaining. There's a great there's a great Shirley MacLaine film called What a Way to Go, I think.
I've seen that.
Yeah, fantastic film, and there's a scene where she's got pink hair and she's dressed in pink, and she's in this pink room, and it's just ridiculous. It's an absolutely ridiculous film, but it's so much fun. So yeah, we will absolutely be discussing films just for their pure entertainment value as well.
Yeah, that would be good to do. Because sometimes when, like, even with classic films, you just want to, like, tune out and just enjoy it and not think about it that much. That's something that I do some of the time, is that I get really into some classic films, but at the same time, I'm just like, I just want to enjoy this. I don't really want to think about character motives and all that and what else was going on. I mean, yeah, sure, it can add to the performance, or it can detract from the performance. But at the end of the day, you know, they are films, and films which need to be conserved and properly taken care of, which is an issue that quite a lot of films have issues with. Like, there have been so many different fires at studios and other safekeeping houses, you know, that those types of places wherein fires have broken out and the original negatives have been destroyed. And that's a damn shame, really. And a lot of scenes that are cut out and they go onto the cutting room floor and then they're never seen again. You just hear about them from editors and producers, so on and so forth. And so you kind of have to piece together, like, whether, you know, that scene would have made sense if it was kept in the film. But you kind of have to understand that those sorts of things had to happen, like, for the purpose of time, really. And maybe people would have to make their own judgment on what could have happened, so on and so forth. It's a complicated situation. I'm making it sound more complicated than it probably is.
But so should we move on to one of our first questions that we also put out to Twitter as well? So this is simply, what are your favourite classic films? So what are your favourite classic films, Rowe?
Let me just rotate round to my my shelves, because they're all almost there. Okay, well, from what I can see, it's just like it's kind of impossible for me to, like, specifically state a number of classic films that I love. And also, I have a Letterboxd account, if you've heard of that, Paul, wherein I have listed down my favourite films in a handy list, which I've titled my personal favourite films, Forever in Flux, in no particular order. And on it, it's not loaded properly. No, wait, it has. Okay, so I already have down Arsenic and Old Lace, Charade, the original Gaslight, starring Anton Walbrook, Gone with the Wind, How to Steal a Million, which kind of comes under it, The Lavender Hill Mob, Mildred Pierce, The Red Shoes, Sapphire, Spellbound, Theatre of Blood, and The Third Man. But I think I'm going to have to go through and change that all, because I've seen some other films that have just... I am going to really appreciate them. Like, for example, Brief Encounter is a great film. It's absolutely devastating. And, you know, Paul, I think if you saw it, you would cry.
What, Brief Encounter? Oh, I've seen it, yeah.
Oh, you have?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Brilliant film.
Yeah. And also The Apartment as well. That was devastating. That's kind of like a... If you want a double header of tears, just watch Brief Encounter from The Apartment.
So are you aware of how those two films are linked, actually?
Yes,
like,
yes, I do.
Linked? Yeah,
I am.
Very good.
I think I read about it before I even saw both films.
Yeah.
Or no, or maybe you mentioned it. I'm not sure.
So go on, do you want to explain, so that anyone who doesn't know of this, of how those two films are linked?
Well, you're the expert. You're The Apartment.
Okay. Well, the whole idea for The Apartment, of a guy renting out his apartment to people who are having affairs, came from Brief Encounter. Billy Wilder watched Brief Encounter, thought it was fantastic, but wondered about the guy whose apartment the two main characters use to have their sort of affairs and their little sort of trysts, I suppose. There's a nice word. And he wondered, okay, well, what about that guy? What happens to that guy? And that's where the whole idea of The Apartment came from. So there you go, trivia. Everyone loves a bit of trivia.
Yep.
Yep. Cool, but yeah, those are great choices. So, anything else you'd add to those choices?
Well, I'm still just like looking through my list. I mean, I do quite like screwball comedies, but I need to watch more of them really. I guess if I were to slim down what my favourites were, or at least two of my favourites are, they are definitely The Third Man and The Red Shoes. I guess the thing is with The Third Man, I can't remember when I saw it. I think I just picked it up in CEX. I saw that Orson Welles was on it. I thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. And I watched it. I was like, this is great. This is, and also the fact that it's set in Vienna as well. So the cinematography is excellent, and the fact there's a film noir as well. There was so much depth to it, and the fact that this guy who writes these westerns goes to Vienna because his friend was offering a job, finds out that his friend is dead, goes on to take on the role of finding out what happened to his friend, and thinks that, you know, the police are against him, so on and so forth. And then there comes in that ambiguity about good and evil as well. And so Joseph Cotton's character is trying to be a hero, but he ultimately fails at that. Have you seen the Third Man?
You know what? I haven't actually. It's one of those massive oversights in my film knowledge, and I need to sort it out. So yeah, I'll have to give it a look.
It's on the BFI subscription player.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend you watch that, as well as The Odd Man Out, which is another film by Carol Reed. It stars James Mason as an Irish, not quite a thief, but he's part of a nationalist group or something like that. And basically a bank robbery goes wrong, and he ends up kind of fighting for his life whilst trying to traverse the streets of Belfast without being caught. So he's literally just been abandoned by his colleagues, and he has to navigate through this city, and he comes into contact with members of the public as well, who are very chucked up on whether they help him or not. It's an absolutely fascinating film, and I highly recommend it. Although similar time, good. I can't quite take James Mason seriously because of his voice. I blame Eddie Izzard for that, because James Mason is so soft-spoken that Eddie Izzard has him as the voice of God when he does a couple of skits in his comedy shows, or he used to. And so now I find it very distracting. And also the fact that I also recently watched James Mason in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, wherein he actually looks quite a lot like Captain Haddock, getting in my Tintin reference there. So you look at him and you think, oh my gosh, that is Captain Haddock. But then you hear him talking, you're like, what?
He's one of those.
The voice.
It is. He's one of those actors who he's got such a distinguishable voice that it's really easy for impressionists to impersonate him, and it's really easy for his voice to become cliche. So when you see him doing a serious role in an old film, it's sort of, you have to almost get used to his voice as his voice rather than something that some impressionist is doing.
Yeah, that's another thing about pop culture as well. They've given you this idea of what an actor was like, so on and so forth, before you actually watch the actor in action. Like I knew a bit. I knew like the general thing about Humphrey Bogart in, say, Casablanca, and you know the lines that are regularly quoted, so on and so forth, before ever actually watching Casablanca. So yeah. The same sort of goes for James Mason as well, with Eddie Izzard doing impressions of him.
Yeah, I think I saw the Looney Tunes take on Casablanca before I saw actual Casablanca. So I was really disappointed that it wasn't Bugs Bunny and all those guys when I finally saw Casablanca.
And then another film that is of huge interest to me and that I consider a favourite is The Red Shoes by Powell and Pressburger. That was done a year before The Third Man, actually. That was in 1948. It's about a ballet dancer who gets torn between, you know, wanting to be with her love of, to be with her boyfriend who's a ambitious composer, and her work as a ballet dancer under the regime of a impresario. And it's Some bits don't make sense, and sometimes the editing is a bit weird as well. There are just some bits that just, as I said before, they don't seem to make any logical sense when it comes to some things, and some of the reactions to a couple of things are quite hilarious to see. It's sometimes a bit too melodramatic, but it's the visuals, the imagery, and what it stands for that really gets to me. And it is overall just a beautiful film. It's there's another film that Powell and Pressburger did of that same colourfulness, shall I say, colourfulness, which was The Tales of Hoffmann, which was a full-on ballet and opera thing going on. Well, it was mostly a opera film, but it still has that same luxury about it, that same vivid detail and colour about it. So they kind of tie in together quite nicely if you were to watch them together. See, I'm endlessly just like suggesting double bills here. But The Red Shoes it's one of the most influential British films, I believe. I mean, Martin Scorsese is a huge fan of it. In fact, he's also a big fan of The Third Man as well. I think he wrote an essay about it in film school, and then his film teacher just said to him, "It's just a film." But Martin Scorsese is a big fan of Powell and Pressburger's work, as well as Carol Reed's too. And it's just one of those films that I love, and that I actually need to watch the Blu-ray DVD of. I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, and oh god, sorry.
Obviously, it's like the image is going to look so much better in Blu-ray than it would on DVD. Like that's why I wanted to get the Blu-ray of The Third Man so much, because the quality is good, but it's not good enough. It's too blocky at times and a bit outdated. So just seeing it in a proper restored mode is absolutely beautiful with that. And I hope to watch that with The Red Shoes. In fact, I may watch The Red Shoes later. I don't know. But yes, those are some of my favourite classic films. I could probably go on a bit more with without giving any fuller answers, as I'm really struggling. So Paul, you take over, please.
Me,
stop
yes.
Talking.
Well, I'm gonna say obviously The Apartment. The Apartment is my favourite film of all time, so by definition it has to be my favourite classic film. But we'll come to sort of favourite directors and writers and partnerships and things like that later on. So I'm gonna save The Apartment for a bit of a discussion about Billy Wilder. So I'll also say things like Sullivan's Travels is another incredible classic film, one of my favourites. It's all about the need for comedies. It's all about this great comedy director, comedy filmmaker who grows tired of making these comedic films and wants to do something of substance, a socially conscious film. And he goes throughout the film and he's trying to make this great film, and he eventually realizes that it's laughter and comedy is itself a great social good and necessary and helps people, and I kind of like that message. Also, another one of my terrible bits of trivia here, the Coen brothers are big fans of the film's director Preston Sturges, and their film Oh Brother Where Art Thou takes its name from the film that forms the centerpiece of Sullivan's Travels. So there you go, there's a nice bit of trivia. But I also really like Frank Capra films, so I've been watching a few of his films recently. You Can't Take It With You, It's a Wonderful Life, of course, over Christmas. And I got my first ever Criterion Collection Blu-ray over Christmas, which was, oh my god, I've forgotten its name. This is terrible. I've forgotten.
You forgot the name of your first Criterion Collection film.
I had its name in my head. Oh my god. It Happened One Night. There you go. It Happened One Night. There you go. We'll just edit that out. Completely get rid of it.
No, we won't.
So yeah, I got that, and I'm really excited to watch that. So I'm a big fan of Frank Capra, but I also really love. I've got a terrible guilty pleasure taste for kind of quite low rent films of that period. So I love the old Tarzan films as well, the ones that had Johnny Weissmuller and Maureen O'Sullivan in them. So the first one, Tarzan and the Ape Man, is just fantastic. You know, it's probably the best Tarzan adaptation out there. But as they went on, they sort of got slightly less impressive in terms of quality. But they are all really watchable. And I love that sort of old school genre of filmmaking. So you can throw in things like the old Universal horror films in there as well. You can throw in things like Creature from the Black Lagoon, which it basically sounds like Guillermo del Toro has not quite remade, but taken huge inspiration from for The Shape of Water, which I'm looking forward to. So I love those, and I for me it's Capra, it's Billy Wilder, it's the sort of genre filmmaking of the time, and it's also sort of musicals, and we'll come back to that a little bit later when we sort of tackle some of our favourite genres and types of classic film. So what I'll do now, we'll go through some of the responses that we got, because we put out questions on Twitter, and we actually got some nice responses, which was good. So Tilly said Singing in the Rain, Roman Holiday, Gone with the Wind, The Red Shoes, The Apartment, and so many to name. She also said anything by Billy Wilder, basically. So that sort of links in with what we've said really so far.
I like how she listed down the films I also like.
Yeah.
Because I watched Roman Holiday for the first time recently, and I was like, what have I been missing out on? And also Gregory Pecker's in it, so Obviously that's kind of my area alongside. Well, I hope it eventually becomes my area alongside Cary Grant films. I just, oh my goodness, so handsome. Yes.
Very handsome man. And actually, now we're talking about the mention of Gregory Peck. Now I'd throw in To Kill a Mockingbird with along with that, because oh god, To Kill a Mockingbird is just incredible.
It is. It really is.
It's just a fantastic film, and sadly still relevant in so many ways, but a really fantastic film. So the next one, Ken Stachnik said Once Upon a Time in the West, Casablanca, Ninotchka, which is an Ernest Lubitsch film. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He also did The Shop Around the Corner, which is a fantastic film that I watched over Christmas because it's very Christmassy. Pretty sure I'm remembering right in saying that was what the Tom Hanks Meg Ryan film You've Got Mail was based on. Joseph Garber said Wizard of Oz, which we've not mentioned yet, but obviously that's just incredible. North by Northwest, The Graduate, King Kong, 2001 Space Odyssey. So they're very good choices as well. And Eric listed a load of great films. So going through these, The Kid, City Lights, The General, College, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Phantom of the Opera, Wizard of Oz, Double Indemnity, Notorious, Rear Window, Psycho, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The 400 Blows, and Stolen Kisses. So there's a lot of great choices in there, and it's good to see some Charlie Chaplin stuff. I'd throw in Modern Times as a favourite Chaplin film. Have you seen any Chaplin?
I don't think I have, no. I haven't really gotten around to seeing any Chaplin, or indeed any Buster Keaton or Harold... What's his name?
Harold Lloyd.
Harold Lloyd, yeah. I haven't... And also Lauren Hardy and I forget their names. Basically, a lot of classic comedy actors I have not properly watched yet. I mean, so the most that I've seen is the Marx Brothers, and that's it.
It's unusual, isn't it? How we sort of, even we've been speaking now for about an hour. A lot of that has been about classic films, and we sort of overlooked the comedies because there are so many great classic comedies. You know, the Marx Brothers are brilliant. I love Duck Soup. Is probably one of the best political satires ever made.
That was my first Marx Brothers
Yes, film. I think it was. Because it's the one that everyone talks about. And I think it's kind of nice to start with one that everybody says is brilliant and also has a ridiculous name. I still love that title, Duck Soup. And I remember watching a few Chaplin films after The Artist came out. So I sort of went through things like The Kid and Modern Times. And Modern Times is just that great blend of my love for film history, love for good comedies, and also my slightly grumpy old man approach to technology, because it really is this whole approach of technology sort of alienating us from each other, and it's really nicely done. It has probably one of the best endings in film history, and also one of the best original songs in film history. So well worth checking out if anybody hasn't already checked that out. So would we add anything else to our list of favourite films?
I don't know, because the more I think about them, the more I realise that there are so many other
Yeah.
films that I absolutely adore. I was just trying to look at classic comedy films on Google, and I was really struggling. Though I am quite fond of the Philadelphia Story. I guess one thing I do like to have in films, I guess, is like the whole social context of it. Sort of like what I was mentioning with The Third Man and The Odd Man Out. Is just like what happens after a country's been through war. Like how do the people react? Stuff like the black market, so on and so forth. Those layers of nuance are always very interesting to me. And one particular film that does come under that, I guess, is, well, not really black market or whatever, but I guess a social commentary, really. Sapphire by, I think, Basil Dearden. Let me just double check. Yes, it was done by Basil Dearden. It was basically about a girl in 1959 who was murdered, and although she appears to be white, she's actually mixed race. And so this girl had been passing for white, basically, and it just basically deals with the racism in London towards immigrants from the West Indies. And especially in today's context, it's a very important film. It's absolutely fascinating to watch and heartbreaking, really. And yeah, it's just I like to look into those sorts of films, really. I mean, I'm sure that there are more films that deal with social issues like that I could name, but that was just one particular one that, yeah, I definitely should give it a rewatch. But it was something that I watched during my college days that did get to me. Anyway, would you like to jump in with anything,
Yeah,
Paul?
I'll just
Make
say
me stop
on this
talking.
on the sort of social conscious element of it, that a really good documentary to watch that came out sort of, I think it was around mid last year, is Five Came Back, which is about great classic Hollywood directors like Frank Capra, John Ford, going off to war and making, I suppose propaganda films, films designed to boost morale, and it sort of tracks where they were before the war, what they did during the war, and the films they made after the war, and it's a really, really good insight into, classic Hollywood, how films can play a part in real history, and just sort of these five men, and it's got input from Paul Greengrass, Guillermo del Toro, Steven Spielberg, and it's really, really well put together, a really good documentary. And I'd also add, on a lighter note, I would throw High Society into my list of favourite films, which I only remembered because you mentioned the Philadelphia Story, and both the Philadelphia Story and High Society are based on the same play, I think, which is called The Philadelphia Story. And I kind of, even though it's a weaker film, High Society, than the actual Philadelphia Story film, I kind of prefer High Society because it's got Grace Kelly in, and I just love Grace Kelly. So there you go.
That's fair enough. I actually
Yeah,
haven't gotten around to watching High Society yet. In fact, I got it for 50p from CEX the other day.
that's good work.
Yeah,
Good
along
work.
with Dr. Zhivago for £1 and Sherlock Holmes for 50p as well. So it was buying films on a budget, and also I have no self control.
Well, when they're that cheap, there's no need for self-control.
Yeah. Like I
Yeah.
went into CX a few weeks back, and I was just like generally browsing, so on and so forth, and then I saw An Affair to Remember, starring Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr, which I haven't gotten around to watching yet, but I bought it because it was cheap, and so it's on my bookshelf, along with any other films that I need to get around to watching. I'm really bad at this. In fact, I ought to mention I have at least 40 or so films that I haven't gotten around to watching yet that are recorded on the Virgin Media box, are on my bookshelf, or are on Netflix. It's gotten to that point where in which I can't decide what it is I'm going to watch, and so I have to decide via randomization, i.e., writing down every single film on a piece of paper and putting that into a jar, shaking it up, and then just seeing what it comes out with. It is literally at that point. I'm looking at the jars right now, and right now I've just lazily written DVD, Virgin Media box, and on demand on jars of apricot jam and marmalade.
That's incredible. I mean, that's a better methodology than I have, which is just me staring at my DVD collection going, I'm not sure I'm in the mood for that. Oh,
Yeah.
but how about that? Yeah.
And what doesn't help was that I went to check what was on the Virgin Media box a couple of days ago as well, just to see what there was. Because we need to shift a few things off there and to see if there was a film that we wanted to watch And the entire time I was just like, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. Jersey Shore, that's not mine, that's mine. So on and so forth, just went on, and then I was listing them all down, and then I was flipping through the Radio Times as well, as you do at Christmas. And I thought, oh well, I'll record that, and I'll record that, and that, and that, and then I realised I had recorded like more than double than what I originally had on the Virgin Media box. I was like, oh, and now I've got other films that I was set to record for future dates. I don't know if I can find the list of what I have. Okay, so this is what I have on the box. Okay, I'll just list a few. My dad and his girlfriend were actually quite surprised about how many I had. My sister was just annoyed that that let this get out of control. So I have down Jailhouse Rock, the Gaslight remake starring Joseph Cotton and Ingrid Bergman, Cape Fear, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Moomins on the Riviera as well, African Queen, Glenn Miller Story, Murder She Said, but I think you wrote down Murder She Wrote, and then I scribbled it out because I realised what I did, because TCM have been doing Agatha Christie days, but no specific sort of thing. It's literally just the Margaret Rutherford, Miss Marple films. So Murder She Said, Murder at the Gallop, Murder on Sea, so on and so forth. The Spielberg documentary, I still need to watch that. The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and The Goodfellas as well. And here's a list of films that I need to record in the next couple of days, and they are mostly on TCM. So there's Pillow Talk with Doris Day and Rock Hudson on the 9th, Rio Grande on the 12th. Empire of the Sun is actually going to be on TCM, Paul, on the 10th.
Oh,
I was
guys,
meaning to mention that to you.
oh, watch Empire of the Sun. Everyone watch Empire of the Sun. It's fantastic.
Judgment at Nuremberg, A Touch of Evil, Night of the Hunter, and How the West Was Won. So many films. This is what it's like. That it's out of control, really. And me buying more DVDs of films that I'm not going to get around to watching for ages doesn't help.
That is fantastic, and it was good to hear an Elvis film on there with Jailhouse Rock, just because I kind of have a soft spot for those. Not particularly brilliant, but very very fun Elvis films that he made. I love Viva Las Vegas.
I haven't seen any Elvis films.
Oh,
So I thought if there was going to be a Elvis film that I was going to watch for the first time, it would probably be Jailhouse Rock or Girls, 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 which is on Netflix. I think also there's another film that he was in, Charo, which I've got on record.
They're great fun. They're not great pieces of art, but they're definitely great fun.
I don't expect them to be pieces of art.
Yeah. If you want colourful, fun, exciting, definitely. If you want great pieces of art, probably not. But there we go. Cool. So shall we move on to our next question, which is what is your favourite classic film genre? Is it screwball comedies? Is it film noir? Is it musicals? So what do you think about that? What's your favourite classic film genre?
Gosh, I don't know. I sort of go between them sometimes, but never like westerns or war films. Like I never call them my favourites. I guess I have a soft spot for film noirs, with The Third Man, Odd Man Out. I'm just trying to think if there are any other film noirs that I can mention. Obviously, The Maltese Falcon is one, but I haven't watched that in ages, so I can't really say. But I don't know what Hitchcock films come under because they kind of cross over everything, don't they? Like thrillers. I guess classic film thrillers are a big one, and musicals as well. I have a thing for musicals. I guess mostly Gene Kelly ones, I'd have to say. So, Singing in the Rain and An American in Paris. Although I'm mostly fond of An American in Paris because of the 12-minute or so ballet sequence at the end. Just because of how ridiculous it is and how Vincent Minnelli it is as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was obsessed with it in college. I really, really was.
Yeah, I love that film, and I love it for exactly the same reason as you love it. It really is like, yeah, let's just end this film with 12 minutes of incredible dancing and color and music, and yeah, it's just wonderful. It's if there is a musical film version of Michael Bay's Bayhem, then it is the end of An American in Paris, and it's just glorious. I'm a sucker for anything like that.
I also really like Call Me Madam that was a Irving Berlin one, which stars Ethel Merman and Donald O'Connor, and that one is absolutely lovely as well. And Gentlemen Prefer Blondes as well. I really enjoy that one with Jane Russell and Marilyn Monroe. Let me just see. I'm having to go onto Letterboxd to list films that I love from certain things. Of course, there's drama as well. I mean, that one is sort of easy to talk about. So, films in particular that I love that are dramas are the Lodger by Alfred Hitchcock, Underground, which is available on the BFI subscription player, and Rebecca as well. Citizen Kane, although I need to rewatch Citizen Kane, and I'm also a huge fan of Spellbound as well. That was also by Hitchcock. I think that may be one of my favourites by him, actually. Actually, looking at it, at the list of drama films that I've seen on Letterboxd, I'm quite a big fan of the majority of the films that I'm seeing here, and all the ones that I've seen up to 1960. Yeah, it's like the vast majority of them I absolutely adore, really. As ever, I'm rambling because I don't really know what I'm saying. I guess just overall, I'm a big Hitchcock fan. Okay, just I know what kind of person he was, but still, just he did such great films. And I'm also a big fan of the Ealing comedies as well, like The Lady Killers and Passport to Pimlico, which I did actually I watched that on New Year's Eve with Dave, and we pretty much said that it's Brexit the film.
I like it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the other Ealing comedy film that I really, really enjoyed, but it's not coming to mind right now. So if I just go into comedy section, it'll come up. Because Ealing comedies are great. Because I actually studied for a bit at Met Film School, which is on the set of Ealing Studios.
Well, while you're looking for that, I will say that I just tried to search for Ealing comedies on Wikipedia, and I ended up coming up with Ealing Common Tube Station, which isn't the right thing at all.
Wow, that's quite impressive.
Is it Kind Hearts and Coronets?
No, no, I don't think it is. It's a really obvious one, but I can't remember its name. Lavender Hill Mob. That's it.
There you go.
That's the film. I love that one so much. It's brilliant. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the Ealing comedies in particular. In fact, I've seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I've seen 6 of them, and they are all absolutely excellent. In fact, Whiskey Galore is on the BFI subscription player, which I'm going to keep mentioning it, okay? Because that's a great place to watch classic films if you're interested. And they have a 30-day free trial going on as well, which is where I'm using that at the moment.
Yeah, and it's the BFI, and the BFI should be supported as and when possible, because I was seeing before Christmas, I think it was before Christmas, maybe it was just this week. Time has no meaning for me anymore, but basically, yeah, because of Brexit, the BFI had planned a big rejuvenation, and because of Brexit, that's now dead in the water, sadly. So, fun times for British film.
I need to read about that, actually.
Yeah.
Would you just tell me, please? If you remember the whole scheme.
I don't remember the whole scheme, but yeah, they've been wanting to rejuvenate their offering for a while, for decades, this story said, actually, and they were going to get like a huge amount of money, but because of Brexit, it's put the dampeners on that, and they've had to abandon the plans. I'll send you a link over, because it was just on The Guardian.
Oh, yes, I've just found it. Oh gosh, that's devastating.
Yeah, it's really sad. It really is. But hey, we've got the blue passports, everybody. Let's celebrate that.
Oh. Anyway,
Yes.
my favourite genres, they kind of go between comedies, dramas, thrillers, film noir. I know I need to educate myself more on other genres, really, but I'd say that those are my favourites, so I just sort of ping between them, I guess. I really want to watch more film noir as well, and more thrillers as well, set in not necessarily London, but other big cities across Europe as well. So more stuff like The Third Man in Vienna and Odd Man Out in Belfast. I'm just absolutely fascinated with seeing post-war Europe and film noir set within those sorts of places, and not necessarily Paris, because have you noticed there's such a tendency to put things in Paris? In particular, like Audrey Hepburn was in 3 films set in Paris during the 60s in particular. I think she may have done like a few more. She did Paris When It Sizzles, which is a great film, by the way, starring her and William Holden. Charade, starring her and Cary Grant. And then later, How to Steal a Million, starring her and Peter O'Toole. Like Audrey Hepburn, for her, she's just stuck in Paris because she looks so sophisticated and fashionable, you know.
Was Funny Face set in Paris as well? I have a weird feeling that Funny Face was, but
It more than likely was.
it more than likely was.
It's
Yeah,
directed
I
by
think
Stanley
it is.
Donen as well.
Yeah. Wikipedia confirms Audrey Hepburn and Paris, they just love each other.
Yeah. She just keeps going back. There you go. What are your favourite genres then?
See, the thing is, I'll start by saying a genre that isn't my favourite, but I would kind of like to watch more of, and that's the Western. Because I've seen a few John Ford films. I've seen, sort of going back to what I was saying earlier about how classic films sort of lose a bit of power because of the amount of times they're on TV. Western films tend to be on TV quite a lot in, quite the morning, a weekday morning, just to fill the schedule. And I've always sort of wanted to watch more of them because they're so critical to classic Hollywood. They really are to classic Hollywood what I suppose superhero films are to modern Hollywood. It was a big genre. People flocked to see these films. There are a hell of a lot of them being made. and I just haven't seen enough of them, and I really want to see more because I love those big sweeping landscapes. I do enjoy the ones that I've seen so far, and there's, it goes back to what I was saying right at the start about how by studying classic film you can there's a link with classic film and history, and I think you can definitely learn a lot about America and its self-image through watching Western films. It's no mistake, it's no coincidence that Ronald Reagan, who as an actor made his name as a Western star, went on to become president, because that, in my opinion at least, is how a lot of Americans they view themselves, as that national image of the lone gunslinger rolling into town, putting everyone to rights. And I think, without getting too political, I think that's part of what's helped Donald Trump get elected, that he acts like nobody can tell him what to do, like the star of a Western film. So it's really, I love that. I would love to love that genre, if that makes sense, but I need to see much, much more. But a genre that I do unequivocally love is just musicals, and classic musicals are the best. As much as I love things like La La Land, they are just imitations of An American in Paris, or The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, or whatever musical you care to throw. And they're colourful, they're beautifully done, they're fun, they've got good music in them. It's just, I can even watch a bad musical and love it. So there was a musical on that I watched before Christmas when I was ill again. I've been ill twice in December, which was annoying, called Daddy Longlegs, and it had Leslie Caron in it, and she's just incredible. And it's not a great film, but it's fun, and it's colourful, and it's vivid and vivacious and wonderful, and it's just fun. And I love that about musicals. They're just so much fun to watch. And I'm getting quite excited at the moment because, and you've made your Tintin reference, so here's my obligatory Spielberg reference. It's not going to be a BFG reference, but Spielberg is apparently in the middle of remaking, or trying to remake, West Side Story, which would be quite exciting because he's been trying to make a musical for years, literally since the 80s, because Hook was going to be a musical initially. And yeah, so it would be really exciting to see if he does actually get around to remaking West Side Story, which is one of my favourite musicals. So fingers crossed it goes somewhere.
I must admit, I am quite intrigued as to whether Spielberg can pull off a musical.
Yeah, me too.
Especially one like West Side Story as well. That's just steeped in social context.
It's going to be really, really interesting. He's got Tony Kushner writing on it, who's famous from Angels in America, and he's also done Munich and Lincoln for Spielberg. And it's going to be really interesting to see John Williams' take on that score, Spielberg, how he approaches it. Like I said, Hook was originally intended as a musical. He's done sort of musical sequences in 1941 and the opening of Temple of Doom. So yeah, that would be quite interesting. But yeah, for me, it's definitely musicals, and I love film noir as well. But again, it's another genre that I need to watch more of, because I think I studied that genre at uni through Double Indemnity, which I really liked, but I never quite picked it up as something that I sort of got too involved in as a genre, even though I should, because it's got all the elements that I like. So it's quite interesting. I'd love to watch more noir films in the same way that I'd love to watch more Western films.
I think it's the imagery of film noir that intrigues me the most because of the shadows, the fact that it's almost always in black and white, and there's always that ambiguity behind it. And it just looks absolutely fascinating. I mean, there are some noirs that I have watched and I didn't quite get them. I think, like I've seen, I don't know if To Have and Have Not with Bogart and Bacall, and The Big Sleep, also starring Bogart and Bacall count as film noirs. I think they may do, but they just I got why they were important, but they didn't quite interest me as much as, say, maybe Spellbound, if that can count, or The Third Man, which is really my to-go-to with film noir, I guess. So yeah, just I'd like to be educated more on them, really, as well as more thrillers from the classic period of films.
I'd be really intrigued to see somebody make a modern noir film. Because we've had the silent film come back through The Artist, we've had the classic Hollywood musical come back through La La Land. There's sort of the whole Nordic noir stuff that they're doing, but the classic American noir film, I can't think of any films that have tried to do that.
There is neo-noir, though.
There is, yes.
There are quite a lot of those.
Yeah, I'll need to watch a few of those, because the classic one they've sort of done through Sin City, but that's just sort of, it's really just taking the visuals from classic noir films, and it's not really, like you say, the ambiguity, the sort of thematic depth of it. I'd have to watch a few more neo-noir films, though. It's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, to be honest.
I'm just taking a list of what counts as a neo-noir, and Zootopia comes under it, apparently.
Really? You know what?
Yes, it does.
That actually...
Someone has genuinely put it down as a neo-noir. Wow.
I can sort of see how that would work, but yeah, interesting. It is that whole sort of, somebody new comes into town and unveils a whole web of corruption. So it's just that person's a bunny rabbit. So interesting.
Yeah, that's true. And also there's the fact that also with film noir, it's like academics and critics have a hard time trying to pin it down as to what it actually is and its characteristics. So some people would say, like Suspicion by Alfred Hitchcock is a noir, but others wouldn't. Other people say that Vertigo is a colour noir, but others also don't. Obviously I've mentioned Hitchcock there, but twice. I guess that's also why I'm interested in film noir, really. The fact that it could mean a lot of things and that it subverts everything, really, but the imagery is still the same. I guess that's what people mostly talk about, but it's like, I think it's what's inside of it, the content, that really frustrates people, really, because it could be focused on a private eye, or it could be focused on a criminal. It can go like in so many different directions.
It is an interesting area, because it's the same problem that people have with defining what a horror film is, that so many people sort of see it as a set of visual things. A horror film, there's got to be someone getting killed or something like that, and there's so much sort of blurring between horror and sci-fi and horror and other genres. Horrors are often called thrillers when they're not really thrillers. So we've spoken about this before. Jaws and Silence of the Lambs sort of fall into that. And it's the same with film noir, that because it's so visual as a genre, like you say, with the use of light and shadow and things like that, that it's quite interesting where you start seeing how it bleeds into other genres.
Yes, totally. And also with horror films, people say that Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte come under that. And I don't see Baby Jane as being a horror. I see it more as being a thriller drama, I must admit. I never found myself feeling that it was a horror film, really. Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which I do recommend, by the way. I don't know if it'll still be on iPlayer or not. That feels more like a horror to me, but it still doesn't entirely fit that area. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, it's worth. I would. It's interesting that you mentioned Rebecca earlier, because I was just looking that up again. It's a great film. I love that film, and I sort of see elements of gothic horror in that film, even though it is, a very dramatic film and very sort of grounded and real. There are elements of gothic horror in there, and I like the way that Hitchcock would often take genres like that and sort of put them in a blender and produce something that you could sort of attribute a genre to, but also had different elements of genre to them. So we had a few answers to this question. What's your favourite genre, classic film genre? So Ken Stachnik said he gave us a few different ones. So he said that his favourite is noir. He thinks the most accessible is comedy. He's got a soft spot for westerns, and he thinks he thinks musicals deserve more love. And Joseph Garber said that his favourite is sci-fi, particularly the old 50s atomic monster films, which I'd agree with, and I'd also throw Forbidden Planet in there as a great classic sci-fi film, probably the great classic sci-fi film. It just, again, it's beautifully colourful, looks great, really expansive, and kind of set the tone for sci-fi films going forwards across the years immediately after, and it still has such a massive influence today.
I don't think I've watched that many science fiction films, to be honest. I mean, even with what Ray Harryhausen does, I still haven't seen that many, really, that are between the 1900s, right? In which there are only two films that I can put down between the 1900 and 1930 that I've seen that are sci-fi, and that's A Trip to the Moon and Metropolis, in which I need to probably rewatch Metropolis at some point. That's what I'll say about every film, is that I need to probably rewatch it. That's definitely an area that I would like to watch more of. I mean, I have seen the Quatermass Experiment, for example, which is that's good. I'm quite a big fan of the whole Quatermass thing. And obviously there's Hammer horror as well, and Hammer did science fiction as well. And I've just taken a look at westerns, and wow, I've seen barely any. So The Great Chain Robbery, Red River, Calamity Jane, Davy Crockett, The Searchers, Valley of Gwangi. There you go.
I do love Calamity Jane. I love a bit of Doris Day.
Yeah, everyone loves a bit of Doris Day.
Yeah. Cool. So next question. So who are your favourite classic film directors, writers, and collaborators? So how about you, Rowe? What are your favourite classic film directors, writers, and collaborators?
It probably doesn't surprise you to know that my favourite is probably Alfred Hitchcock.
There we go.
That is a problem that I need to change. And I'm also a huge fan of Powell and Pressburger, as per mentioned before. I guess that's just like a part of what's just stuck around with me from college, really. And especially when it comes to Powell and Pressburger, they did The Red Shoes, Black Narcissus, A Matter of Life and Death, Colonel Blimp, I Know Where I'm Going, A Canterbury Tale. I've seen the vast majority. Well, no, I say the vast majority. I've seen half of what they've done, I guess. I mean, there's still a number of films that I need to watch that are, in fact, available on the BFI subscription player. And there was this one particular film that they did called Gone to Earth, starring Jennifer Jones. And that's meant to be set in the Salopian countryside. And Jennifer Jones does a terrible country accent in it. I don't quite know how to describe it, really, but it's quite a film. So they've done quite a fair few interesting films. Like, they don't just touch on war. They also go into nuns with Black Narcissus. They do fantasy. They do ballet as well, and they do They did a few World War II films as well, like The Small Back Room doesn't really count as that, but like The 49th Parallel, Spy in Black, one of our aircraft is missing, and obviously A Matter of Life and Death, and sort of Colonel Blimp as well. And it's the imagery in it. It's mostly the visuals. I'm touched by the visuals mostly when it comes to these films. And apparently Winston Churchill didn't like Colonel Blimp whatsoever because of what it was commenting on with war and the British, in particular. So that was, I think that was nearly banned, but Powell and Pressburger managed to overturn it. And obviously, when it comes to Hitchcock, that's just a really easy one to write down, because I've seen the majority of his films already, and they all have their merits, really, and it's quite hard to give favourites, I guess. Well, I say it's hard to give favourites. I mean, I'm sort of always bound to Vertigo, it seems. It's college, and there's also Rebecca, and Shadow of a Doubt, The 39 Steps, Spellbound, and obviously Cary Grant was in quite a lot of those films as well. I feel like I'm doing a bad job of explaining this again, but although some of his films were duds, some of them were quite bad, I'd say, or just didn't make that much sense. But at the same time, it's to do with like how the cinematography was done and how he created how his crew made the atmosphere as well, the way things were shot, some typical tropes in there, like the wrong man, being chased by police, a bait and switch with someone's motives, so on and so forth. And also it's like all his usual key players as well all have a part in that, like James Stewart and Grace Kelly, Cary Grant, Vera Miles as well, Joseph Cotton, and Joan Fontaine. And I'm also like a big fan of North by Northwest as well. It's just, when it comes to writing fiction, and I think a lot about North by Northwest's theme when it comes to action and adventure, thriller, that sort of stuff. That's just what makes me think, really. And just, damn it, Hitchcock. It's at that point in which I've gone back to rewatching the video that was shown at the start of The Art of Making Movies at Universal Studios Florida. It's absolutely fascinating to watch, and at some point I wouldn't mind doing a proper HD version of that entire montage that is shown. But obviously it'd be quite a hefty job, seeing as I can't identify a quarter of the films that I used in that video. So I highly recommend watching it, and actually looking at the whole Art of Making Movies thing that Florida used to have. So take a look at that, Paul. Do it.
I will. But I'm in agreement with Hitchcock. He doesn't seem to have been the nicest of guys, but he did make some incredible films. And North by Northwest is fantastic. His contribution to filmmaking is immeasurable. I mean, even the idea of the MacGuffin. The MacGuffin is the thing that everybody is chasing after that doesn't really matter all that much. It's just something that the plot is built around. So the most accessible example of that beyond Hitchcock films is in the Indiana Jones films. The Ark of the Covenant, the Sankara Stones, the Holy Grail, the Crystal Skull. These are MacGuffins. They don't matter that much, but they're just what the plot is based around. Any filmmaker, popular Hollywood filmmaker, whether it's Spielberg, whether it's Scorsese, whether it's David Fincher, they all owe a debt of gratitude to Hitchcock.
Yeah, he did pioneer so many different techniques in the suspense and psychological thriller genres, something that I totally did not just read off Letterboxd.com. I think that's why I like Hitchcock so much. It's because of the psychological thriller. I guess maybe that could be said as being my favourite film genre, maybe when it comes to classics. Yeah, I think that's it. It's all because of bloody Hitchcock.
Bloody Hitchcock. And the thing with Hitchcock is he is the filmmaker who, I think anyone who has studied film to any degree, Hitchcock is one of the people that you would be introduced to first of all. Because he like I say, he's got such a huge influence, and he's got such a clear and distinct style that any teacher, any lecturer who is wanting to teach a class about composition, blocking, cinematography, use of music, use of an actor, themes, all these, the idea of director as an auteur, you can see it all in Hitchcock. And because Hitchcock films are so damn entertaining, it's really easy to sell a class on them. You know, everyone would want to watch Psycho or North by Northwest. So it's really easy for a film teacher or a film lecturer to teach a class about Psycho because it's such an entertaining film. And, you know, I was the same. When I first studied film at university, Hitchcock was one of the first directors that I was introduced to. And, you know, he's so accessible that it's really easy to learn about film through those films. And I think it's very telling that the film that I was introduced to, which was Rear Window, has remained my favourite Hitchcock film. I love Rear Window, and again, it's probably helped by the fact that it's got James Stewart and Grace Kelly in, and I love both of those actors. Apart from Hitchcock, are there any other directors or collaborators or whatever that you particularly like? Oh, and Powell and Pressburger, of course.
You know what, I'm not really sure. I really need to educate myself more. Like, those are the only two people who I can really talk about. Well, only three people, really. Powell and Pressburger are one person. I don't know if I've seen that many Frank Capra films, actually, or Billy Wilder. I mean, I've seen Some Like It Hot, which is great, and quite a lot of Stanley Donen films as well. I'm quite fond of him, as well as Vincent Minnelli.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't think of anyone else who I've seen most films of who I can really passionately speak about without giving any proper answers. I guess David Lean maybe, but not quite to the extent that I wish. I mean, I've only really seen Blythe Spirit, Brief Encounter, and Lawrence of Arabia from him.
It's good that you mentioned Capra and Wilder there, because those would be my go-to ones. So Capra, and particularly his collaborations with James Stewart. So you're looking at things like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, You Can't Take It With You, It's a Wonderful Life, of course. You know, those, I am a shameless sentimentalist, and I love Capra's sentimental approach to life. I love the idea that Jimmy Stewart can go to Washington and actually make a difference, and It's a Wonderful Life, you know, he's sees that, you know, despite all that he has to go through in that, his life does have value. I shamelessly love all of that. And at this time of year, the winter, I love watching old classic films, and it's always Capra and Jimmy Stewart films that I go to. But I would also add in Wilder to that, and I would say that Billy Wilder's collaborations with Jack Lemmon are very, very famous. They're brilliant films, most notably The Apartment. But what made those films work more than anything is his collaboration with the writer I.A.L. Diamond. So I've got up the Wikipedia pages, and here is a list of films that they made together. So you begin in 1959 with Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, 1, 2, 3, Irma la Douce, Kiss Me Stupid, The Fortune Cookie, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, Avanti, The Front Page, Fedora, and Buddy Buddy. Now, as those films go on, they get weaker. That it is the law of diminishing returns, particularly when you start getting to things like Fedora and Buddy Buddy, which aren't particularly brilliant. But that is an incredible list of films, and I love what they did together on The Apartment and Some Like It Hot. The Fortune Cookie is a great film as well as Kiss Me Stupid. I really love Irma la Douce, which is a reunion for Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon from The Apartment. It's set in Paris, so it's not just Audrey Hepburn who goes to Paris all the time. That is a ridiculous farce. It's completely nonsensical. It's Jack Lemmon dressing up in various guises to win the affections of Shirley MacLaine. It's nonsense, but it's glorious nonsense, even if it doesn't hold together at all in any way. And Diamond and Wilder, you know, their names would have been Hollywood icons, even if they'd only made The Apartment and Some Like It Hot together. But with the rest of them, and with everything that they did together, it's incredible. They really were two of the best collaborators, and they formed one of the best collaborations in Hollywood history.
I definitely need to watch more Billy Wilder films. I think I may have The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes recorded, so I need to get around to it. But definitely with Jack Lemmon and Billy Wilder, any suggestions? Those sorts of films would be excellent.
I would say definitely, if you haven't seen Irma la Douce, watch that, because Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon together are just brilliant. I'd also say watch Avanti, which is nothing like as good as other Billy Wilder Jack Lemmon collaborations, and it was towards the end of Wilder's run of films, but it's good. It's a very fun, warm-hearted film, so I really like that.
I'm just taking a look at the article on Wikipedia now, and yeah, I'll give it a watch at some point. That being the keyword, well, keywords, some point.
Some point.
Like with every other film that I need to watch. Yeah. So I've got a question with regards to Frank Capra. Which modern director would you say you can see him as being, or like basically I want to see if you would see that Spielberg is basically Frank Capra.
Yeah, totally. There's no doubt. Oh, I mean, I am predictable as hell, but I'm aware that I'm predictable as hell. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that.
So then, who is the Jimmy Stewart?
Oh, Tom Hanks,
I knew it.
my
I
boy
knew you
Tom.
would say Tom
Me,
Hanks.
me and Tom, we were talking on Twitter this week. Me and Tom, we're friends now. Me and Tom. Yeah, Tom Hanks is definitely the Frank Capra, the Jimmy Stewart to Spielberg's Frank Capra. There we go. That's what I was going for. And it's really interesting how Spielberg uses Tom Hanks. I don't think it's any coincidence that he cast Tom Hanks, the great American modern day actor, as an immigrant in The Terminal. In the years after 9/11, when there was so much sort of lockdown on people coming into America, he tends to use Tom Hanks as like a symbol for what America is, and it's no surprise that he used him like that in The Terminal. In a similar way, well, not in a similar way, but he sort of traded on his Americanness and his iconography as an American in Bridge of Spies as well. But enough about Spielberg. This is a classic film. Come on.
Sorry, I just had to ask, okay? Blame it on me.
No, but it's absolutely true. There's no doubt that I like Capra because I like Spielberg. Oh dear, I am so predictable. I'm so predictable. But one thing that I liked about Five Came Back, the documentary I mentioned earlier, is that it's not Spielberg talking about Capra. Guillermo del Toro talks about Capra in that series, so it's well worth checking out.
I think I did watch some of it, but I just couldn't really get into it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like I was painting a fence whilst I was watching it, so that may have contributed to it. I'm really not joking. I was just watching it whilst I was painting the fence in the garden, and I was just like, maybe not at this time.
Yeah.
It doesn't really interest me. So I ended up watching Twin Peaks instead on my phone whilst I was painting in the garden.
That's an odd mishmash.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think we're actually hitting nearly the 2 hour mark now, so I think there you go. So anything else that we want to cover on classic film?
Not this time, no. I feel like my answers could have been way better, and I could have been a bit more what's the word? Explanatory?
It's a good enough word for me.
I could
like
have explained more. Okay, that's something that I actually need to work on, really, and I need to work on a lot of things, as well as watching all these films.
Well, I knew what you were talking about. I think it was good. It's interesting stuff.
But yes, classic films. Obviously, there's way more that we could have touched on during this, but this is just like a basic discussion that we had, really. I mean, we won't go too deep into things, but we definitely will do more specialist stuff in the future, especially when we have watched more films of a certain director, a certain actor, so on and so forth. So who knows what we're going to do next?
I don't know. But we'll think of something, and we'll announce it on Twitter, and we'll put out more questions and more conversation starters, so everyone listening can get involved. And again, that Twitter handle is at Two Film Introverts, with the two as the figure two, rather than written as TWO.
All right, so is that it for now?
Yeah, I think that's it for now.
So this has been me, Rowe, aka Iddy Rose Sing Classic on Twitter, and
me, Paul Bullock, and I'm at @PaulBullock on Twitter.
yeah, we will be talking soon. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.